Imagine a place where children were forged like weapons, where the whisper of weakness was drowned out by the clash of shields. Sparta wasn't just a city, it was a radical experiment, a gilded nightmare that still challenges what we think about power, freedom, and madness. But hold on tight, because the story you know, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Here's the thing. How did a civilization that created history's deadliest warriors drown in its own poison? Why did a people who worshipped honor leave behind a trail of betrayal, fear, and dirty secrets? Oh, and there's more. Do you really think the 300 at Thermopylae were heroes, or hostages of a system as cruel as Persian spears? Here's a hot spoiler. Sparta had a heart of stone, and it was cracked from the start. Want to uncover how a myth was born, grew, and nearly destroyed itself? Don't blink, because this journey will make you question how far human madness can go in the name of glory. But before you think you know the ending, remember that dirty secret no one tells in the books? Yeah, it's about to come to light. And no, it's not about "this is Sparta." But let's start at the beginning. How did a band of shepherds hardened by the wind become the ancient world's most feared war machine? This part is where the gods laugh and the blood starts to flow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to help us out. The origin, when gods whispered in the valleys of the Eurotas. Once upon a time, there was a people bitten by wolves. No, it's not a legend. The Spartans emerged from a valley hidden among mountains so harsh even the gods hesitated to climb them. But how the hell did a handful of shepherds, hardened by wind and hunger, become Greece's most terrifying war machine? Here's the kicker. They didn't choose war. War chose them. Trapped between enemies and barren lands, Sparta sprouted like a thorn bush, fierce, twisted, full of pain. But here's the irony. They wanted safety, and ended up creating a monster that devoured even its own children. Oh, and there's a bloody detail no one tells. Before they were warriors, they were survivors. And survival, my friend, has no honor, just sharp knives and moonless nights. But wait, because then came a man who decided surviving wasn't enough. He wanted perfection, and his name, well, you've likely heard whispers of him in history's shadows. But how do you turn flesh and bone into steel? The answer came with laws so cold even the Eurotas River froze in fear. And that's where the story gets hot. Want to discover how a mad visionary shaped a nation and planted the seed of its own destruction? Lycurgus and the Iron Law, when utopia became a cage for souls. Imagine a guy who walked into the room of history, turned off all the lights, and lit a fire that would burn for centuries. Lycurgus wasn't just a legislator, he was an architect of golden nightmares, an alchemist who tried to turn human blood into invincible metal. They say he traveled the world in search of answers, but what he brought back wasn't wisdom. It was a manual on how to crush the soul. First came the Agoge, children torn from their mother's arms at the age of 7, thrown into stone barracks where crying was forbidden. Imagine boys learning to steal just to eat, not out of malice but to train their cunning. If they were caught, the beating they received wasn't for stealing, but for getting caught. It was a twisted game where only the cruelest became heroes, and the women, they were sculptors of warriors trained to dance with swords and sing hymns of blood. Lycurgus gave them power, but only so they could birth soldiers. Love, weakness, affection, poison. Even marriage was a cold ritual. The groom would steal the bride's night, only to return to the barracks before dawn. Romantic, right? But his masterstroke was abolishing gold. That's right. Sparta used iron bars as currency, heavy, useless for trade. The idea was to kill greed, but what it birthed was a black market of betrayals, where even kings whispered deals in the shadows. The irony? They wanted to eliminate corruption, but instead, they wove a web of lies worse than any other kingdom. And here's the secret no one tells you. Lycurgus wasn't a hero. He was a fanatic who believed only suffering could purify. His laws weren't accepted. They were imposed with a madman's grin. They say that, in the end, he made the Spartans swear that nothing would change until his return. And then he vanished forever. Did he flee? Was he devoured by his own rules, or did the gods punish him for playing deity? So, did it work? On the outside, Sparta became a marble statue, beautiful, imposing, indestructible. But inside, it was a hornet's nest, because even the equals had masters, and the so-called harmony concealed hatred so deep that even the Euphrates River avoided passing through the city at night. Want to know who really pulled the strings? In this theater of shadows, the answer will make you question everything you thought you knew about Spartan freedom. The homoioi, the myth of equality no one dared face. They called themselves homoioi, the similars, the equals. Sounds noble, right? A society where all shared land, voted in assemblies, and wore rags to avoid vanity. But wait, something here stinks. Behind this theater of harmony, Spartans whispered a question on the darkest nights: equals in what? The truth: Sparta's elite was like a frozen lake, smooth on top, cracked beneath. The homoioi had land, yes, but distributed so unevenly that some feasted while others starved. The assemblies? They decided less than a breeze. Real power lay with the ephors and kings, untouchable figures dictating the dance. And the simple clothes? Just a facade. While commoners wore rough linen, nobles hid fine cloaks under tattered rags, and their banned feasts, flooded with imported wine and boar meat, were held in secret cellars. The hypocrisy was so thick you could cut it with a sword. But the worst wasn't the lie, it was the silence. No one dared question the farce because doubting equality meant betraying Sparta, and traitors. Well, you know their fate. And so, while the homoioi performed their ballet of unity, another group watched from afar, the helots. Enslaved, humiliated, but countless as grains of sand. And the question no one wanted to ask was simple: how long until the sand becomes a storm? The Battle of Thermopylae, the day the myth met the edge of reality. Thermopylae. The name echoes like a hymn to courage but hides a labyrinth of uncomfortable truths. Yes, 300 Spartans fought to the death against a Persian sea. But the story you know is a portrait painted with blood and propaganda. Because while Spartans became legend, 7,000 other Greeks, Thebans, Thespians, Locrians were erased from the narrative. Like shadows on a stage lit only for heroes, the Spartans knew the battle was suicide. Leonidas, the warrior king, marched not for glory, but duty. A prophecy claimed Sparta would survive only if a king fell in combat. Thus, death became political calculus. The soldiers, pawns in a divine chess game where even sacrifice had an owner. And the Persians? Darius, king of kings, wasn't a fairy tale villain. His army, colorful and chaotic, reflected an empire that absorbed cultures, not crushed them. While Sparta froze in rigor, the Persians flowed like a river, flexible, adaptable. The irony: their clash revealed Sparta's discipline. So revered was also its prison. Oh, and that famous "come and take them," Leonidas shouted, probably never happened. The phrase was invented centuries later when Sparta was a ghost, needing myth to stay relevant. The 300's true farewell was silent. A last breath before sand buried their bodies and propaganda turned them into gods. The Golden Age, when power became a gilded cage. Sparta, at its peak, was like a lion asleep on treasure, majestic but paralyzed by its own weight. After decades of war, it ruled Greece with an iron fist, deciding who rose or fell. Its allies? More hostages than partners. The Peloponnesian League wasn't an alliance. It was a captivity disguised as brotherhood, where cities like Corinth and Athens danced to Spartan swords. But what held this empire? Not just armies. It was fear. Fear of helots. Fear of enemies. Fear even of its own citizens. Sparta lived in eternal war because peace, to them, was poison. Without conflict, there was no reason for discipline, for cruelty. Thus, the peak became a trap. The more they dominated, the more they needed to dominate, a cycle devouring society's bones. Here's the unseen irony. While Athens invested in philosophy and art, Sparta froze in time. Its streets had no poets, only soldiers. Its temples celebrated not gods, but its own glory. Even its economy, reliant on helots, was a ticking time bomb. The gold that glittered atop was a mirror, reflecting power but hiding cracks. And the Spartans? They knew. At secret feasts, generals drank bitter wine and whispered of failing harvests, sons dead in pointless battles, and a people who no longer believed their own myths. Greatness, after all, was a burden no one knew how to carry. But what happens when the fear that sustains an empire turns against it? While Sparta looked outward for enemies, a threat grew within. Silent, countless, hungry for revenge. The helots were no longer shadows. They were a storm about to swallow the sun. The helots. The nightmare. Sparta created but could never escape. The helots were Sparta's dirtiest secret, the backbone of an empire built on chained bodies. While Spartans trained for war, they planted wheat, forged weapons, and carried the dead. A cruel irony. The city that boasted self-sufficiency depended entirely on those it treated as trash. But the helots weren't just slaves. They were a conquered people, reminded daily their existence mattered only for sweat. Sparta humiliated them in public rituals, drunk on fear. The Cryptaia, a secret force of Spartan youth, hunted helots at night like animals, blending training with state terror. Violence became routine, like acid rain corroding the city's moral core. But oppressed people are quicksand. The harder you stamp, the deeper you sink. Revolts erupted like fire in dry grass. In 464 BC, an earthquake shattered Sparta, and the helots rose in rebellion. For 2 years, they besieged the city, proving the bronze giant had feet of clay, and here's the truth Sparta never admitted. Their greatest fear wasn't Persians or Athenians. It was the mirror. The helots showed them what Sparta could have been without Lycurgus's chains. Fragile, vulnerable, human. That's why the violence was so desperate. Panic from knowing the debt would one day be called. But the nightmare didn't end there. While Sparta wasted strength crushing revolts, a new enemy rose. Not a distant empire, but a neighbor who'd learned all its tricks. When Thebes raised its spear, it wasn't just a battle that began. It was the end of an era. Ready to see how one strike toppled the Colossus? Leuctra, the day the myth crumbled like a sandcastle. Sparta always believed its army was invincible, until 371 BC, when Thebes said no in blood and iron. The Battle of Leuctra wasn't just a defeat, it was a political earthquake. For the first time, the Spartan phalanx, symbol of unbeatable order, was shattered by tactics that defied everything they knew. Theban general Epaminondas didn't play Sparta's game. He rewrote the rules. While Spartans charged straight as machines, Thebes attacked at an angle, focusing force on a weak point. The final blow, Thebes' sacred band, 150 pairs of warriors bound by love and loyalty, something Sparta's cold rationality could never grasp. But the real wound was psychological. Of 700 homuaioi who marched to Leuctra, 400 died. For a society reliant on few citizen soldiers, it was a heart stab. The irony, Sparta, which scorned weak emotions, was defeated by an army fighting for something stronger than discipline, passion. Oh, and there's a detail victors hid. Epaminondas didn't want to destroy Sparta. He wanted to humiliate it, to prove its model obsolete. And he did. After Leuctra, Greek cities that once trembled at Sparta began to laugh. The lion, it turned out, was a declawed cat. But the fall didn't stop there. Wounded Sparta clung to the past like a shipwreck survivor to a sinking raft. They banned change, persecuted innovators, and blamed the gods. Meanwhile, the world moved on. Macedonia rose, Rome stirred. Like a ghost haunting itself, Sparta lingered. But you know what happens to those who live on ghosts, right? The decline, when the lion became a puppet of empires. After Leuctra, Sparta became a shadow pretending to be substance. As Greece transformed, it clung to the past like a child to a torn blanket. Macedonians like Philip II mocked Spartan. rigidity. You train for last century's wars. And they were right. When Alexander the Great marched to conquer Persia, Sparta stayed behind, not by choice, but irrelevance. Its soldiers, once legendary, became extras in a play with no audience. Even Persians who once trembled at Sparta now ignored it. The irony. The world Sparta helped shape now swallowed it whole. But the final blow came from Rome. In 146 BC, Romans crushed Greece but spared Sparta. Like sparing a sick old animal, the city became a relic, kept alive not by strength but others' nostalgia. Its warriors, once feared, now paraded for drunken Roman senators. And here's the saddest secret: Sparta accepted it. Elite after elite traded honor for crumbs of power. Spartan kings became Roman puppets, and Lycurgus laws, once sacred, became banquet jokes. The fire that once burned in Sparta's heart was now dead embers, blown only by winds of shame. But even as a puppet, Sparta found no peace. Centuries later, a new empire, built on marble and propaganda, would turn it into merchandise. Because even the dead can be exploited, and Rome knew that best. Want to see how a warrior myth became a tourist souvenir? Roman Sparta, when legend became theater sets. Rome didn't destroy Sparta. It preserved it in amber, turning it into a living museum to feed imperial curiosity. By the 2nd century BC, the city that once defied empires became a tourist trap. Young Spartans reenacted fake battles, and Lycurgus's laws were recited like poetry at Roman-funded festivals. Romans admired Sparta like an extinct animal, with nostalgia and condescension. They bought relics, many fake, and lapped up exaggerated tales of Thermopylae, ignoring Sparta's decay. Even freed helots worked as guides, spinning romanticized versions of their own slavery. But the cruelest cut was political. Sparta kept kings and assemblies, but they were Roman puppets. Ephors, once guardians of law, now rubber-stamped Latin decrees. The Agoge, the brutal training, became spectacle. Spartan teens raced naked in staged trials while Roman nobles laughed and tossed coins. And Sparta's elite? They cashed in on the myth. They sold fake genealogies, invented ancient rituals, and built new temples with old inscriptions. Sparta, which once despised lies, now lied to survive, not as a power, but as a historical curiosity. But the Spartan myth didn't die there. Centuries later, it would resurface, not on shields or swords, but on cinema screens and comic pages. When Hollywood cloaked Leonidas in red, the world cheered. But you know what happens when history becomes entertainment, right? Some secrets never survive the spotlight. Modern myths when Sparta was reborn in pixels and screens. Sparta died twice, once as a city and once as history. But Hollywood and video games brought it back, not as it was, but as we want it to have been. In 300, the Spartans got red capes, chiseled abs, and one-liners that would have made Lycurgus roll in his grave. The result? A repackaged myth where blood became a special effect and complexity turned into cliché. Comics, movies, and even anime turned Sparta into a playground of toxic masculinity and hollow heroism. Leonidas became a superhero without flaws. The helots were erased from the narrative, and the Agoge, an institutionalized system of torture, was rebranded as inspirational training. The irony: the more Sparta became entertainment, the more the real Sparta was buried under layers of distortion. But don't just blame the writers. We, the audience, bought the product. We want invincible warriors, not men haunted by the fear of failure. We prefer simplistic heroes to complex leaders who stumble over their own contradictions. Sparta, after all, became a mirror, reflecting our fantasies of power, control, and glory without consequences. And the worst part? Even academia fell into the trap. Universities use 300 to teach history, and politicians cite Sparta as a model of discipline, ignoring the human cost. The myth, now, is more profitable than the truth. And the truth? Well, it doesn't sell tickets, But while the myth shines, archaeologists dig into the soil of the Eurotas for answers, because behind the screens and comics, the Earth still holds secrets. What remains of Sparta besides bones and legends? And will we ever discover who they really were, or will we choose to keep lying to ourselves? Secrets underground. What archaeology doesn't tell us about Sparta. Beneath the soil of the Eurotas, there are more questions than answers. Archaeologists have been digging for centuries, but Sparta resists. Its temples are shattered, its tombs looted, and even the bones seem to whisper half-truths. Why? Because the Spartans themselves erased their history. While Athens sculpted marble and wrote tragedies, Sparta banned monuments, as if fearing that memory itself was a weakness. Some discoveries, however, are unsettling. In 2020, a tomb near the river revealed children's skeletons with signs of ritualistic violence, perhaps victims of the Agoge. At another site, clay tablets bear encrypted inscriptions, still undeciphered, that may reveal the secret diaries of Helots. And the temples of Artemis, their foundations suggest they were larger than the Parthenon. But why did no one rebuild them? Here's the paradox. Sparta, obsessed with control, lost control of its own narrative. Almost everything we know comes from enemies. Athenians, who hated it, Romans, who romanticized it. To this day, archaeologists debate whether the Cryptia was real or myth, whether the women were powerful or prisoners, whether Leonidas was a hero or a fanatic. And modern technology. It helps, but it doesn't uncover everything. Tomographs have found hidden chambers beneath the Spartan theater, but they've been sealed for millennia. Satellites map the valley, but the soil stubbornly guards its secrets. It's as if the Earth is saying, some truths aren't ready to be born. But while the myth shines, the legacy of Sparta persists, not in statues or swords, but in ideas. Because a civilization that dies twice, in reality and in memory, can be reborn as an ideological ghost. What does Sparta teach us about sacrifice, freedom, and the price of utopia? And most importantly, why do we keep repeating its mistakes? The legacy. When utopia became a warning. Sparta isn't dead. It echoes in every speech glorifying sacrifice for the greater good, in every system that prefers control over compassion, in every fictional hero who repeats, "We'll return with our shield," or "on it." Its legacy isn't in marble, but in the ideas that, like viruses, infiltrate governments, schools, and even our personal ambitions. The great lesson of Sparta isn't about war. It's about the price of perfection. What's the value of a society that trades childhoods for soldiers, love for discipline, truth for myths? And the scariest part, why do we still romanticize it? Today, it echoes in ideologies that idolize brute force, in leaders who sell dictatorships as efficiency, and in cultures that glorify suffering as virtue. But there's hope, because knowing the real history of Sparta is gaining an antidote. Every time someone cites its values as an example, you'll know the truth, that glory without humanity is a castle of lies, and that even the strongest empires crumble when they confuse power with greatness. And so, we end our journey through Sparta, not with answers, but with burning questions. So, time traveler, what do you take from this story? The truth is, civilizations fall, but ideas can be eternal. It's up to us to decide which ones deserve to live. Thank you for joining this expedition. If you've made it this far, you're already a Spartan of curiosity, and that's what keeps history alive. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. Which chapter shocked you the most? And will we ever escape the fascination with bloody utopias? Stay tuned, because the next civilization we'll explore also has secrets that will blow your mind. Until then, remember, the greatest battle isn't against enemies, it's against the lies we tell ourselves.